Hi everyone. I'm just waiting for Nuzly to join. There we go.
Hi, Chalana. Can you hear?
Right. Hi Nuzly. Yeah, can hear you now.
No, that was, I think, some network issue I had. Dialogue sometimes, goes really bad. Even now, I think I have some. I think we can manage it. And unfortunately, I will be having a power cut within the half an hour. So I'm already having a
Okay.
emergency light with me in case it something goes off. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for being with us. It was supposed to be 5:30, but it's 7 o'clock now. Anyways, today I have Chalana Wijesuriya. He's a psychologist and amazing human being to the society. And I would like to talk about the mental health issues that's everyone in everyone's life that we are facing, and the taboos around it, especially in our community. Chalana, welcome to the show. Thank you for being with us today. So, first of all, Chalana, tell me something like these. So there are like so many kind of mental health disorders, right? So are these mental health disorders usually come from birth or people are pushed into it?
Yeah. So the current research, what it mainly says is that there can be different factors. So sometimes it can be biological, psychological, and environmental. So what that means is when we say biological, sometimes it can be due to genetics, and sometimes it can be to kind of long-lasting ways of thinking that can have an effect on how the brain works, which can be biological. So in terms of psychological, due to external environment and the way you interact with people, you develop ways of thinking, which makes it a bit more psychological. So there itself can be a way in which psychological disorders kind of come about. And then there are environmental factors, which are basically stressors, which are externally affected, which are stresses that affect you externally, right? However, I mean, so you can't really say that you're born with a mental disorder. Not all people are born with mental disorders, and nor can you say people are pushed into a mental disorder, right? But also something important to remember is there is another concept in terms of stressors, is that sometimes people might have a kind of a tendency, like there might be a kind of a area where mental disorder is inside you, like a genetic component, but it might not be shown unless there is a particular stressor. So there might be a tendency for that to be there, but unless there is a external stimuli, like a stressor that affects you, that won't kind of come about. So that itself is there, which is called like the Dicey stress model. So there are different ways of how mental disorders come about, and there's no one way mental disorder can come into play.
So, so that's a good answer. So, before coming into our country's topic, so if you go into social media nowadays, TV series, web series coming out, especially with Netflix and other, based on true serial killers like Ted Bundy or the recent one, Jeffrey Dahmer, or something like fictional stories like You, especially like the used TV series. People are starting to romanticize it with this. Do you believe these productions actually bring light to mental health, or do you think it's worsened by desensationalizing these cases?
Uh, yeah, I think especially with Dharma these days, like it's a hot topic. My personal view about these kind of Netflix series and movies that come about serial killers, does not necessarily highlight mental health issues per se, but there is more of an entertainment purpose, and there's a lot of sensationalizing of these stories, right? But just because you brought up Dharma, I'm just going to kind of say that I watched Dharma, right? I'm not gonna lie, I watched the Dharma series.
That's what my next question is about anyway.
Uh, so
So, yeah.
Yeah, so just with the Dharma series, basically, I think one thing they managed to do is, yes, artistically, visually, very good production, but at the same time, they have made sure to highlight it's not only his own circumstances that made Dharma who he was, but there were external things that took place in his life that also made Dharma who he was, right? So I think this series in some way managed to kind of show the the rejection from his family, and the he didn't have any friends, so in terms of social connectedness there was nothing there. Neglect from the parents side, then there was the parents were divorced, they had mental health, I think the mother was consuming some drugs before his birth and things like that. We don't necessarily know all of these things, but so there are other aspects other than the fact that either Dharma was born this way from the beginning, or that he just became it. So it can be two things. But also when we speak about Dharma, we also have to kind of also think about the negative side. Like if you actually look at how Dharma was made, the producers unfortunately have not spoken to the victims or the survivors of the cases. So what happens to them is they get re-traumatized by watching this, and every 5 to 7 years the Dharma, like some TV series or some story comes up, and
I mean,
what does
if you go into Netflix, you can see like, I mean, you can watch it anyways. It's right there. You can say Ted Bundy, the New York killer, the Trinity. Like there are so many. Like they've been producing those kind of things. I mean, that goes with the people as well. I mean, like people love to watch those things. I don't know. That's also some kind of disorder as well. I mean, like, sad is mental disorder, maybe. I don't know.
it, it,
So,
it's it's an area where it kind of piques people's interest, because not a lot of people know about serial killers. So it's like very fascinating to watch these things, but at the same time you have to think as to why people make these things, and does it really help, or these are questions to ask.
when it comes to these serial killers, these most of them were based on what we see is Europe and what do you call USA. That's what we are seeing. But I'm pretty sure in South Asian countries also there were exist these kind of people. So what kind of mental disorder these serial killers actually possess? And also, will these people ever recover? Let's say they get caught and they go into jail. Will these people ever recover?
Yeah, it's a very complex kind of question, which I might not answer quite. I'll attempt to answer it as possibly as I can. So in terms of serial killers, right? So most serial killers that people have studied about, what they've identified is that they lack empathy, so they can't really connect with another person's feelings, right? So there's lack of empathy. There is a lot of narcissism, and there are some other components as well that kind of make them who they are. And what these components do is, this is what creates their personality, right? And usually something like what the serial killers have are known to be personality disorders, which are definitely much more complex than mental disorders that we understand to be like mood disorders like anxiety or depression or things like that. Because a personality is what kind of makes you who you are, and it's a bit more rigid than other components of your psyche. So what we understand right now is that when it comes to personality disorders, it's a bit difficult to kind of, I mean, in terms of curing, I don't think we speak about curing it, but it's more in terms of supporting people who have personality disorders in making them aware of the problems they have. and how can they kind of, work on the way they think. Then what are the coping skills that they can work on to kind of live a normal life, right? And when I talk about personality disorders, not to say that anyone who has a personality, there are different clusters, right? So there's like a book that psychologists use, which is called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, currently the 5th TR stage. So in that, basically, personality disorders are broken into 3 clusters. So there are different kind of personality disorders that one can look at. But again, you can't just read something and be like, oh, maybe I have this and I have that. Sometimes people tend to do that, but you have to
People
kind
try
of.
to, that's common nowadays, I guess. Like people try to, if they get a headache, they just Google it and see, but ended up seeing like, oh, I have a cancer. They do that nowadays. So,
Exactly.
anyways,
Yeah, but you should speak to a professional at any point in case you have any questions.
yeah. So, deviating from that topic, so life has been hard in Sri Lanka, especially last couple of years, with everything that's been happening, not only economy, this COVID, and so many other things. So, do you see raising cases of people who are depressed, under anxiety, mentally pressured, and depressed? How do you manage to treat these people?
Yeah, I mean, Sri Lanka as a country since 2019, really, I think we have been facing a lot of changes politically, economically, financially, socially, right? There are a lot of issues that have been coming about. So, in terms of the people who have, to have a few more mental disorders over the last few months and last few years have definitely increased. With the second question you asked, how do I manage to treat them? Basically, with each person, it's different, right? So there is no blanket way to just kind of, okay, if it's depression, you do ABC, and then everyone who does ABC will get cured, right? Because with whatever mental disorder, you have to also look at the person, right? Where do they come from? So what are the other intersecting factors that might contribute to that mental disorder? So you really have to identify those, and through that only you can support a person. And at the same time, I mean, if you look at people, yes, there are people who still go through the same kind of, life stresses in Sri Lanka, for example, but there are some people who do get mental disorders or, have problems. So there are people who don't have the same kind of problem. So you have to see as to why these things happen. I think which we might be speaking a bit later anyway. So yeah.
So, with the current economic conditions, not everyone would have the luxury to go into psychological help, and there is a huge stigma in this community because when someone goes see a therapist, when someone goes see a psychologist, people start thinking, your own family start thinking, oh, there is something wrong with this person. So, how can someone who has some kind of depression avoid this and tackle this scenario, like the financial and the stigma?
Um, yeah, in terms of seeking psychological support, currently there is governmental organizations and non-governmental organizations that are providing mental health support. There are free places, there are non-governmental like NGOs that provide free mental health support as well, and there are private practices where you have psychologists and you can speak to them. So there are a lot of areas and a lot of places where psychological support is available, but again the quality of it can vary from place to place, person to person, mainly because psychology itself is it's a bit it's not as regulated as psychiatry, so to say, but that itself is a different problem that I'm not going to touch on. But at the same time, in terms of reducing the stigma, I think what's important is to focus on the fact that, it doesn't necessarily need to be a professional that you have to go and speak to, right? And just even if you just open up to a friend or someone a loved one, right? Just opening up about a mental health problem. And it doesn't necessarily need to be, I'm depressed. It can just be like, I find it difficult to cope with something happening at work or home or something. Just having that conversation with someone, that itself will support you in terms of, dealing with something that you have, that you're kind of dealing with. And at the same time, in terms of psychological support, the main thing is the stigma is also around, because people think that you have to be crazy if you are going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And that's the other thing that we need to change. So also, I just want to mention that basically Sri Lanka follows a medical model of practice. What that means is it's more of a curing, like basically you have a problem, so you go to the doctor to get the medicine to get yourself cured, right? Now, with the practice of psychology also, what people right now are doing is that, okay, only if they have a mental disorder, if they feel like they're having, difficulties, very serious difficulties only, they go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist to seek psychological support. But it shouldn't be that way. What it should be is that, the same way we eat healthy, we exercise, and, we take care of our physical health, the same way, even your mental health, you have to take care of it the same way you do physical health. So one way to do that is, there are other things that you can also do, but even if you don't have a huge problem, and even if it's something very slightly, speaking to a psychologist or a mental health professional once a month, or, just having a check-in, kind of will support you to kind of, get a better idea of what you're dealing with, and it'll give you a different perspective.
We are
So
just talking like a body checkup, a mental health checkup.
exactly, right. And yes, some places can be expensive, but there are free places as well. So even if you just kind of go once a month at least, just for a check-in, that'll really support you.
People shouldn't be thinking that you are marketing your job anyways.
Yes, I want to kind of issue a disclaimer that basically, like
This
what
is
I'm
not,
saying right now is more of a broad setting, and none of this should be taken as, mental health advice for one person. In
yeah,
case it's something that you feel like you're struggling with, you should speak to a mental health professional. Yeah.
yeah. Anyways, getting back to COVID, when COVID came, lockdown was a very widely used terminology, not only in Sri Lanka, all around the world. Ever since then, it was actually very successful in suppressing the virus and everything happened. But it also mentally pressurized people because people had to stay home for months and stuff, and people started depressed. And currently, we see lots of people, ever since the lockdown, are disconnected from society. Is it normal to feel that way? And do you think people can actually come out of this disconnecting part?
Hmm. Um, so with what happened with lockdown, again, what we understand is that it's something outside of your control. So it's an external stimuli that forced us to be inside our homes, in our rooms. Now, some houses and some people, especially if you're privileged enough, you would have stayed in a house where, you had different areas of the house and all of that, but that's not the case for everyone. Some people might have just one tiny room where you're stuck, right, for months and months. And as humans, we are social people. We do require particular social connectedness, as human beings, right? So while, yes, due to external reasons, we were forced to do that. Um, there are, I mean, things that you can do to kind of re-explore that social connectedness, right? And I remember when we were working during COVID-19 times, stuck at home, one of the main things that we were encouraging people to do is connect. I know it's still online, it's still through online means, but just connecting with whoever and just having a conversation, or just, watching something together or listening something together, but just doing something together itself will give some kind of emotional relief. So that is what we were kind of working on. So people, again, so some people, it was easy for them because their social supports were really good, and again, if they were more privileged, obviously. But some people, I think, did definitely find it really difficult to cope with the lockdown and, with being stuck at home. And that would have definitely affected them in numerous ways. But again, it's the first thing in terms of going about something like that is first identifying and understanding that I am going through this. What are my emotions right now, right? Identifying those emotions and how those emotions can kind of affect the way I think and the way in which I behave because of those emotions, right? So through that, you will be able to kind of seek support or speak to someone, and then from there onwards take it on. So it's a process. It's easier said than done, but yeah, you just have to consider there are different areas, so you can't just say do this and then suddenly everything will happen. So yeah, it's a bit complex.
So, so basically, the person who is going through should identify there is something like not normal is happening. Like, I'm getting pressurized by something, I'm getting depressed. Or you can see my life is not normal. So I should talk to someone. It's better than keeping it inside.
It's not to say that I'm not normal and I'm getting depressed, right? Because as someone who might not be in the psychological field, you might not really know what depressed looks like, right? Depression looks like, or anxiety looks like, or a mental health disorder for that matter. But if you're struggling with, if you feel like you are not doing the way you were working, maybe a week before or 2 weeks. So in terms, if you have understood that your daily routine and the way you work before has changed, then you should kind of see, okay, maybe I should speak to someone, right? So from there, if you speak to a professional, the professional will be able to support in terms of, okay, what can you do, and what are the social supports that you can build, what are the habits that you can build, and things like that.
Since you talked about anxiety, so when people get anxiety or panic attacks, people used to there are like some other complications. One of the complications that I personally explored is like I used to forget what happens when it happened, like when I go through an anxiety attack. So is it normal to feel like this? And what would be what as a psychologist, what would you say, for someone who is going through anxiety or panic attacks, like, to do immediately when they're, going.
Yeah. So, with anxiety or a panic attack, we understand that to be a bit more complex, right? So, for an external stimulus, there are ways that you normally react. So, there are normal ways to react to it, and then there are certain reactions that can be a bit more complex. So, with anxiety, and if it goes into a panic attack, for example, we understand that to be a bit more complex, and you need to kind of seek support if you feel that you might have had a panic attack or an anxiety attack, because for that you need professional support in terms of helping how to kind of deal with something like that. And when you work with a psychologist, what you will be doing is understanding what were the triggers that kind of brought in that anxiety, or what kind of made you have that panic attack, right? So with the psychologist, you are able to develop a particular plan where you can identify certain triggers that may have kind of brought that about. And then what you do is you build tools within yourself. So in case you face another trigger, right? So then you know that, okay, so I'm maybe going into an anxiety or a panic attack. So that way it helps you to realize that, okay, I might be going into that. So what should I do? And then you with your therapist, you develop certain tools to kind of, it might be relaxation activities, it might be grounding activities, right? But that will be dependent on the person. So no one can say, okay, do this, this will help you. That it has to be a tried and tested method. For some people, certain things might work. For some people, it might not work, right? So you have to try and test it with your therapist and find your own plan as to how to go about it. That's why it's so diverse. It's not like a pill where we can just give it to everyone. It has to be tailor made, and it needs to be a thing that we work together. It's not as easy as, yeah, now go do this. Okay, I think Nuzly had a connection issue, so I'm just going to wait for Nuzly to join. Thank you for everyone who else has joined and is watching. I'm just waiting for Nuzly to join back. I think he had a connection issue, so just give it a few more minutes for Nuzly to join. Okay, let's see if. Okay, I think there were a few questions. Maybe I might just answer that until Nuzly joins. Yeah. Okay. Hi, we need your recommended exercise to reduce stress and anxiety that we can do at work. Again, as I said, there are a lot of relaxation exercises that you can do, and not only relaxation, basically just focusing on your well-being, right? So there are a lot of things that you can do in terms of well-being, where if you look at what well-being actually is, I spoke about the fact that well-being doesn't necessarily mean that you go to a psychologist just when you have a problem, right? But it also means that you kind of do things in your life, your everyday life, that supports you in your well-being. So if you look at different areas of your life, like environmental things, emotional, social, spiritual, right? So if you look into these components, right, these are normally the facets that develop, that kind of build your mental health or your well-being, so to say, right? So it can be physical and more psychological as well, right? Okay, Nuzly is here. We'll add him as well. So what you can do is kind of incorporate things that you can develop your well-being. So for spirituality example, if you are doing yoga or if you meditate, so incorporating that into your everyday life will support your well-being. Then if you are someone who's social, spending time with your friends and loved ones and connecting with them. Then in terms of financial well-being, right? So things that you can do for your financial well-being can help your overall well-being. So what you do is you're introducing aspects into your overall well-being that will support you. So in case there is an external stressor, might it be the current state of the country, or a family issue or a relationship issue, or a personal problem that comes that is not within your control. Having a good well-being, what it does is that basically it kind of improves that, it gives you it makes you more resilient, right? So that way you are able to cope and deal with certain issues that come about better than when you don't have kind of like a good well-being, right? So I was just answering questions that.
Sorry. No worries. That's fine. You're just engaging with the people. So my next question is like, I'm someone who has been involved with this current ongoing protest and stuff. So because we've been in the road for a long time, we feel so much of depression, anxiety, and certain triggers there we have. Like I personally know certain triggers that might trigger us during, like, it's kind of post-traumatic ones. So so what kind of advice you would give me if I come to you, like, so certain things.
Yeah. I think my previous answer was connected to this. Maybe that's why I also kind of thought about answering that question. But just to answer what you just asked, the first thing is, yes, now, similar to you, a high stress environment, right? Especially if as someone who might be at the forefront of the protests and things like that, that can be highly stressful, right? So in terms of your well-being itself, you would ideally have to kind of develop certain coping mechanisms, right? So developing habits, developing ways in which you can kind of focus on yourself, your emotions, your thoughts, and what you do, right? To reduce those stressful events. And sometimes it can also be that, you focus on what is within your control and what is not within your control, right? That itself will be very supportive to kind of, focusing your attention on what you can change and what you can't change, right? Personally at that point. Now, in terms of what you said, that, you might have certain triggers and you might have something post-traumatic. Now, again, that would be a bit more complex, right? So that we might have to kind of explore what kind of things happened to you, right? So what were the events that took place for you to come here, and then what are the structures that are already within your life, within your habit and your well-being, that are already there, that supports you, right? So identifying those will help the mental health professional to kind of develop a particular system that works for you as well. So it works with both of us. So both of us will have to create that system, and then only you will have to practice it. And sometimes it might not work, sometimes it might work. But again, what's important is we have that conversation and we keep modifying it so that we find something that works for you, right?
So before we go into the next question, I think you asked me to give a trigger warning for people who are out here, because we are going to talk about especially the suicidal sort of a thing. So if someone is not willing to and has a kind heart, you can leave this conversation. So as a psychologist, you might be facing lots of suicidal survivors regularly, and each case might be different. And is the solution for them is the same, or what do you like? Generally, there must be this thing that you say to each of these survivors, isn't it? Like, I mean, even though the cases are different, like how they're how to cope with their suicidal, you know, thoughts and beliefs.
Yeah, so mostly if it's something to do with, if it's a person to do with, if they have kind of self-harmed, right? One of the main things is a particular validation that we need to give them, right? And to making them know that their feelings and the emotions they're going through are valid. Because most of the time, especially with people who self-harm, they feel alone. They feel like no one else feels what they're experiencing, and they feel like they're out of options and that they don't have any other support. So as a in a professional setting, usually we validate them. We have to validate them and make sure that they know that, the emotions, the feelings are completely valid, and it's completely all right for them to feel that way. But also kind of giving them different options as to how they can reach out to support, right? I'm just going to quickly also mention, in terms of, because we have a wide audience here, sometimes people also think seeking psychological support is getting advice from the psychologist and getting options as to what to do. But usually that's not the case. We don't necessarily just say, okay, now go and do this. What we do is, again, as I said, we develop a particular plan, and we give information to the client, and it's a client that decides the way to go. So we are just basically the facilitator in the path that they want to take, right? And usually we don't necessarily kind of say, okay, you can go and do this, and you can do whatever you like, but we kind of guide them in the path that will be the most resourceful and the most helpful for them in terms of kind of coping with a particular issue that they may have faced. So with people who have self-harmed, again, it's very crucial that we work with them a bit more regularly. We have to work with their emotions in terms of social support, and also what external factors may have helped in terms of the external factors that made them get there, right? And yeah, it's mainly that what we usually do.
So, so what would you advise? Like, again, not advise. What would you be your guide if someone like around those
Yeah.
people, like, if someone has suicidal thoughts, if someone is around them, those are like close to those people, what would you say to them? You know, rather than like you would obviously ask them to bring these people to, a psychologist. At least until then, there should be a way, I would say,
Yeah.
to cope
Yeah,
with
so
them.
what I can kind of uh, very broadly say, if anyone has thoughts of self-harm, thoughts of suicide, or knows anyone who might be, attempting something to kind of self-harm, what you need to know is that, your thoughts, again, your thoughts and feelings are extremely valid. What you're going through is valid, and that there is support. Now, when we talk about support, there is informal and formal support. In terms of formal support, there are counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists who are there to support you. And in terms of informal support, it's basically just reach out. Speak to a friend, speak to someone you trust, speak to a loved one about what you're going through. You might be feeling that, you are all alone and you don't have any other option. And that is what you might be feeling at this point. But know that there is help out there. And if you decide to reach out to someone again, either a friend or a professional, and there is support if you want to take that path.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chalana. Anyways, so many struggles, so many problems in my connection, everything that's been happening. We managed to, I think, provide a good overview of what people should do. So basically, if you are feeling some kind of, abnormality in your, in your life, like if you're feeling heavy or some sort of this thing, make sure you seek psychological support. That's what basically it like, it's not leave the taboos around off, just go and see someone. That's idea that we can give. And next week, I'll be in a good place, I promise, because I'm bringing Kumar Sangakkara in for the show. So hopefully everyone would join. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chalana. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Nuzly. No problem.